The cruelest invitations are the ones sent with a smile. The chandeliers hanging above the Grand Oak Ballroom scattered warm gold light across hundreds of guests dressed in tailored suits and designer gowns, turning the evening into the kind of wedding people talked about for years. Crystal glasses chimed softly. Laughter drifted between tables. A string quartet played near the stage while photographers moved through the crowd capturing every polished moment. At the center of it all stood Marcus Reed. Confident. Relaxed. Victorious. His tuxedo fit perfectly, his smile never wavered, and every conversation seemed to reinforce the same message: he had won. Beside him stood his bride, elegant and radiant beneath the glow of the ballroom lights. Guests congratulated them, investors shook hands, and old friends raised glasses in celebration. Yet every few minutes, Marcus' eyes drifted toward the back of the room. Toward a single empty chair. The chair had been placed deliberately. Not hidden near a corner. Not forgotten among distant tables. It sat close enough to the main floor that everyone could see it. A small ivory name card rested against the plate. Vanessa Brooks. Some guests noticed it immediately. Others noticed after whispers began spreading from table to table. A few exchanged knowing smiles. Several leaned closer to hear the story. The ex-wife. The woman who used to stand beside Marcus before success arrived. The woman many believed had disappeared after the divorce. The woman few expected to see tonight. Marcus accepted another congratulations and casually glanced toward the chair again. Still empty. His expression remained pleasant, but satisfaction lingered behind his eyes. He had mailed that invitation personally. Not through an assistant. Not through an event planner. Personally. The envelope had carried gold lettering and expensive paper, the kind reserved for important guests. On the surface, it looked respectful. Generous, even. But Marcus knew exactly why he had sent it. He wanted Vanessa to see everything she no longer had. The ballroom. The guests. The influence. The life. He wanted her to walk through those doors and understand that he had moved forward while she had been left behind. Across the room, two women quietly discussed whether Vanessa would actually show up. One shook her head. No chance, she whispered. If I were her, I'd stay home. Another guest laughed softly. Maybe she never even opened the invitation. The comments blended into the evening atmosphere like background music. Nobody said them loudly. Nobody needed to. Assumptions traveled quickly when a story had already been written in people's minds. Marcus heard enough to know exactly what the room believed. Vanessa Brooks was yesterday's chapter. A forgotten chapter. A closed chapter. The wedding coordinator approached and informed him that the ceremony would begin in 10 minutes. Marcus nodded and thanked her before taking one final look toward the empty chair. Still vacant. A slow grin touched the corner of his mouth. Around him, guests settled into their seats. Phones disappeared into pockets. Conversation softened. The quartet transitioned into a gentler melody. Everything was unfolding exactly as planned. The chair remained empty. The room remained certain. And Marcus Reed stood beneath the golden lights believing the night belonged entirely to him, unaware that somewhere beyond the walls of the ballroom, beyond the assumptions, beyond the whispers and laughter, a story everyone thought had ended was quietly approaching the front entrance. 3 years earlier, the silence inside the small townhouse felt louder than any argument could have been. Rain tapped softly against the kitchen window while unopened bills sat stacked near the edge of the counter. Vanessa Brooks stood alone beneath a dim ceiling light, staring at a framed photograph that had not yet been taken down. In the picture, she and Marcus smiled beside a rented moving truck on the day they launched their first business together. Back then, neither of them had much. They shared long hours, cheap takeout dinners, and dreams that seemed impossibly large for two people with almost nothing in their bank account. Vanessa remembered nights when Marcus would fall asleep at the dining room table while she stayed awake reviewing contracts and answering customer emails. She remembered weekends spent driving across town to meet clients who barely knew their names. She remembered believing that sacrifice was something people made together. The photograph remained in her hands for a long moment before she carefully placed it face down inside a cardboard box. By then, the company was growing. Investors had arrived. New opportunities appeared. Expensive offices replaced folding tables. And somehow, as the business expanded, the distance between them grew even faster. Marcus began traveling more often. His phone remained face down during conversations. Meetings stretched later into the evening. Explanations became shorter. Eventually, silence filled the spaces where partnership once existed. The final conversation had lasted less than 20 minutes. No shouting. No dramatic scene. Used cold certainty. Marcus sat across from her in a downtown office conference room and explained that their lives were moving in different directions. The words sounded professional, almost rehearsed. Vanessa remembered the reflection of city lights on the glass behind him. She remembered the way he avoided looking directly at her when discussing the future. Most of all, she remembered realizing that the decision had already been made long before he spoke it aloud. Within months, people who once called her regularly stopped reaching out. Invitations disappeared. Business contacts became distant. The same people who praised her work when she stood beside Marcus suddenly acted as if she had never been there at all. It was not one dramatic loss that changed her life. It was 1,000 small disappearances. One by one. Quietly. Relentlessly. Yet standing inside that modest townhouse, Vanessa never cried for the company. She never cried for the house. She never even cried for the reputation she had lost. The thing that hurt most was discovering how quickly people forgot the hands that helped build something once the spotlight shifted elsewhere. Outside, the rain continued falling across the dark street. Vanessa picked up the final box and carried it toward the front door. The house felt emptier than ever, but her steps remained steady. She locked the door behind her without looking back. At the time, she believed she was walking away from everything she had built. She did not know she was actually walking toward the version of herself that nobody had seen coming. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at exactly 6 o'clock, but by 5:55 nearly every seat inside the Grand Oak Ballroom was filled. The soft glow of candlelight reflected across polished glass and white floral arrangements that stretched the length of the aisle. Conversations faded into whispers as guests settled into place, adjusting jackets, smoothing dresses, and checking their phones one last time before the music changed. Yet even among the elegance and celebration, attention continued drifting toward the same place. The empty chair. Vanessa Brooks's name remained printed neatly on the ivory card resting beside untouched silverware. 5 minutes earlier, some guests had expected her to arrive at the last moment. Now confidence was growing. She was not coming. A man near the front row leaned toward his wife and quietly remarked that it was probably for the best. Another guest suggested she might have realized how uncomfortable the evening would be. A few people nodded in agreement. They spoke about her as though she were no longer a real person, only a story from Marcus Reed's past. Something discussed rather than remembered. Marcus stood near the altar greeting late arrivals. Every smile appeared effortless. Every handshake seemed relaxed. But each time the ballroom doors opened, his eyes moved there first. Watching. Measuring. Then the doors would close again, revealing another guest, another vendor, another member of the staff. Never Vanessa. A wedding coordinator approached and informed him that they were ready to begin. Marcus glanced toward the chair one more time. Empty. The sight seemed to confirm exactly what he had expected. Whatever pride Vanessa still possessed had apparently kept her away. Perhaps she could not bear to see what his life had become. Perhaps she simply did not want witnesses. Either explanation pleased him more than he would ever admit aloud. The quartet transitioned into the opening notes of the ceremony music. Guests straightened in their seats. Cameras lifted. A quiet excitement moved through the room as everyone prepared for the evening's main event. Yet despite the occasion, small pockets of conversation continued circling back to the missing guest. It was remarkable how much attention one absent person could attract. Near the back of the ballroom, an older investor who had known Marcus for years studied the empty chair with a thoughtful expression. Unlike the others, he did not smile. He simply observed. Almost as if he sensed that certainty had arrived too early. Outside, beyond the ballroom walls, dusk settled across the city. The parking lot lights flickered on one row at a time. Luxury sedans lined the entrance. Ballet attendants moved efficiently between vehicles. Everything appeared calm. Predictable. Ordinary. Inside, Marcus accepted one final congratulations from a business associate before taking his place. The ceremony was seconds away from beginning. The chair remained empty. The guests remained convinced. And the story everyone believed they understood seemed complete. Then somewhere beyond the property gates, far enough away that nobody inside could hear it yet, a line of headlights emerged from the evening darkness and began moving steadily toward the venue. 10 minutes before the first guest noticed anything unusual outside the venue, Vanessa Brooks sat quietly in the back seat of a black vehicle parked nearly half a mile away from the ballroom. The city lights reflected across the window beside her, turning the glass into a mirror. For a moment she could see both versions of herself at once. The woman she had been 3 years ago and the woman she had become. Her hands rested calmly in her lap. No nervous movement. No hesitation. No visible anger. The invitation Marcus had mailed months earlier remained folded inside a small leather portfolio beside her. She had read it only once. That had been enough. Most people would have assumed the invitation reopened old wounds. The truth was more complicated. It reminded her how far she had traveled without anyone noticing. 3 years earlier, after leaving the townhouse for the last time, Vanessa had rented a one-bedroom apartment above a small coffee shop on the east side of town. The floors creaked when she walked across them. The heating system worked only when it wanted to. During winter she often wore 2 sweaters indoors while reviewing job applications late into the night. Some mornings she woke before sunrise and worked 2 separate jobs in the same day. She managed administrative projects for a local nonprofit during business hours and completed freelance consulting assignments long after midnight. There were no investors applauding her efforts. No magazine interviews. No congratulatory speeches. Only long hours and quiet determination. Yet unlike the life she once shared with Marcus, every step forward belonged entirely to her. Months became years. Small contracts became larger ones. One satisfied client recommended another. Then another. Vanessa never chased attention. She focused on consistency. While others pursued recognition, she built trust. Slowly, opportunities expanded beyond the city. Regional organizations sought her expertise. New partnerships emerged. Revenue increased. The progress was not dramatic enough for headlines, but it was real. More importantly, it was hers. Along the way, she learned something unexpected. Success felt different when it was no longer attached to proving someone wrong. One afternoon, nearly 18 months earlier, a business conference introduced her to people she never imagined meeting. Executives. Founders. Investors. Not because she was somebody's former spouse. Because her work had earned their attention. She remembered entering the conference center carrying a worn laptop bag and leaving with 3 new contracts. She remembered realizing that nobody in the room cared about her past. They cared about results. The memory brought the faintest smile to her face as the vehicle remained motionless beneath the evening sky. Outside, another set of headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. Then another. And another. One by one, additional vehicles quietly joined the line behind hers. Their engines remained low and controlled. Their arrival felt organized, deliberate, almost ceremonial. The driver glanced toward her through the front mirror. Ready, he asked politely. Vanessa looked out toward the distant glow of the wedding venue far ahead. Somewhere inside that ballroom, hundreds of people believed they already understood her story. She reached for the leather portfolio, closed it gently, and nodded once. "Yes," she said. The first vehicle shifted into motion, and the line behind it moved with perfect synchronization toward the place where certainty was about to meet reality. As the line of vehicles moved through the evening traffic, the city seemed to slow around them. Streetlights reflected across polished black exteriors while drivers in neighboring lanes glanced over with quiet curiosity. There was nothing loud about the procession. No flashing lights. No unnecessary display. Yet the simple sight of 6 identical luxury vehicles traveling together carried a presence that was impossible to ignore. Inside the lead vehicle, Vanessa remained focused on the road ahead. The closer they moved toward the venue, the more memories seemed to fall away. Not because they disappeared, but because they no longer controlled her. 3 years earlier she might have spent the entire drive rehearsing conversations that would never happen. She might have imagined explanations, arguments, or apologies. Tonight there was only calm. Her phone rested beside her. Several unread messages waited on the screen. One came from a client in Chicago. Another from a board member in Atlanta. A third contained a brief note from someone who had become one of her most trusted professional allies over the past 2 years. Nathaniel Grant. The message was short. "Safe travels. See you soon." Vanessa smiled faintly before locking the screen again. She remembered the first time she met Nathaniel at the business conference 18 months earlier. Unlike most people in the room, he had not introduced himself by listing accomplishments. He had spent nearly an hour asking questions about her work instead. Real questions. Soulful questions. The kind that revealed genuine interest rather than polite networking. At the time, Vanessa had no idea he controlled one of the largest private investment groups in the country. She only knew that he listened carefully and never seemed impressed by titles. Over time, their professional relationship grew through mutual respect. He became a mentor when she needed guidance and an advocate when opportunities expanded beyond her experience. Yet even then, Nathaniel never tried to place himself at the center of her success. He simply opened doors and trusted her to walk through them on her own. The vehicles continued forward until the distant glow of the wedding venue appeared beyond a line of trees. The ballroom lights shimmered against the darkening sky like a beacon visible from half a mile away. Up ahead, guests inside were likely settling into the ceremony. They were probably convinced the evening had already revealed all its surprises. Vanessa looked through the windshield as the first entrance sign came into view. Her reflection stared back from the glass. Composed. Steady. Un second. The driver slowed slightly as they approached the final turn leading toward the property gates. Behind them, the rest of the convoy maintained perfect spacing. Every vehicle moved with quiet precision. Every detail had been arranged carefully. Not to impress strangers. Not to create a spectacle. Simply because certain occasions deserved intention. The gates opened. The lead vehicle rolled forward. One after another, the others followed. Far ahead, near the ballroom entrance, a valet attendant happened to glance toward the road. His expression changed immediately. Then another staff member looked. Then another. Within seconds, heads were turning toward the approaching headlights. The ceremony had not started yet. The empty chair still waited inside. And for the first time all evening, the certainty surrounding that chair began to crack. Inside the ballroom, the first signs of distraction appeared like ripples moving across still water. A valet attendant stepped through a side entrance and quietly whispered something to another member of the staff. Moments later, a second employee glanced toward the front windows overlooking the driveway. Then a third. The ceremony music continued playing, but attention was beginning to drift away from the altar. Guests noticed it almost immediately. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Curiosity spread from table to table without a single announcement. Marcus noticed the shift and followed the direction of their attention. At first he saw nothing unusual. Then he caught a glimpse of headlights beyond the glass. More than one vehicle. Far more. Outside, the convoy rolled slowly through the entrance circle with measured precision. The lead vehicle stopped near the covered drop-off area. Seconds later, the second arrived. Then the third. Then the fourth. One after another, identical luxury vehicles formed a line that stretched across the front drive. The sight alone was enough to silence several conversations. Nobody knew who was arriving. Yet everyone instinctively understood it was someone important. Back inside, the wedding coordinator hesitated near the stage. The ceremony was supposed to begin. Instead, dozens of guests were now looking toward the entrance. Marcus felt a faint tension settle into his shoulders. It was not fear. Not yet. More like irritation. His carefully planned evening was no longer following its script. The ballroom doors remained closed. The mystery lingered. An older investor seated near the front slowly lowered his drink and narrowed his eyes toward the entrance. Recognition flickered across his face for a brief moment before disappearing again. Nearby, several business executives exchanged curious glances. One of them quietly asked whether a governor or corporate chairman had arrived unexpectedly. No one had an answer. Outside the lead vehicle, a driver stepped out and moved calmly toward the rear passenger door. He did not rush. He did not perform for attention. His professionalism only intensified the curiosity growing around him. The evening air felt unusually still. Across the parking area, even staff members had paused to watch. Inside the vehicle, Vanessa sat quietly for a final moment. The ballroom lights reflected against the dark glass beside her. She could hear nothing from inside the venue, yet she understood exactly what was happening beyond those walls. People were wondering. Guessing. Building stories. With incomplete information. The same thing they had done for years. The difference tonight was that she no longer felt any need to correct them. Her success did not depend on being understood by everyone in the room. It never had. She adjusted the sleeve of her tailored navy dress and glanced briefly at her reflection. There was no trace of the exhausted woman who once sat awake worrying about overdue bills in a tiny apartment. That version of her had survived difficult years and transformed them into something stronger. The driver opened the door. Cool evening air entered the vehicle. Vanessa placed one foot onto the pavement and stood. Nearby conversation stopped entirely. Through the ballroom windows, silhouettes shifted as guests moved closer for a better view. Marcus stared toward the entrance from across the room. For the first time all evening, the empty chair no longer looked empty in his mind. It looked occupied. And as Vanessa began walking toward the ballroom doors with calm, unhurried confidence, the story everyone believed they understood started slipping beyond their control. The ballroom doors opened without fanfare. No announcement followed. No spotlight appeared. Yet the effect was immediate. Conversation stopped in mid-sentence. Several guests who had been standing quietly near the entrance instinctively stepped aside. Vanessa Brooks entered the room with the same calm expression she had carried throughout the entire evening. She did not rush. She did not search for reactions. She simply walked forward. The navy dress she wore was elegant without being extravagant, tailored with the kind of confidence that came from knowing exactly who she was. For a moment, the only sound inside the ballroom was the distant music still playing from the quartet near the stage. Then whispers began moving through the crowd. At first, people struggled to reconcile what they were seeing with what they expected to see. They remembered the woman who had left years ago. They remembered the stories they had repeated to one another. None of those stories matched the person now crossing the room. Marcus felt the shift immediately. He had imagined many versions of this moment. He had imagined Vanessa arriving emotional. He had imagined her arriving uncomfortable. He had imagined her not arriving at all. What he had never imagined was this. There was no hesitation in her posture. No trace of insecurity. No sign that she viewed herself as an outsider. She looked completely at ease. That realization unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Guests continued watching her progress toward the seating area. Some recognized her instantly. Others needed a few moments before recognition appeared on their faces. The reactions were remarkably similar. Surprise. Confusion. Curiosity. The empty chair that had attracted attention all evening suddenly became the most important seat in the room. Vanessa reached it, paused briefly, and placed a small leather portfolio beside her plate before taking her seat. The simple action carried unexpected power. She had not entered to make a statement. She had entered as though she belonged there all along. Across the ballroom, several business leaders quietly exchanged glances. One executive who had attended a national conference the previous year recognized her name and leaned toward a colleague. Another investor appeared equally surprised. Recognition was spreading through parts of the room Marcus could not easily control. The ceremony coordinator approached him again and softly asked whether they should proceed. Marcus nodded automatically, but his attention remained fixed on Vanessa. Something about the evening felt different now. The balance had shifted. He could feel it even if he could not explain it. Vanessa, meanwhile, remained completely composed. She acknowledged a polite greeting from a nearby guest and offered a small smile in return. Nothing more. She never looked toward Marcus. She never acknowledged the whispers. She never attempted to defend herself against years of assumptions. The absence of reaction only amplified her presence. People expected explanations. She offered none. People expected discomfort. She displayed none. As the ceremony finally prepared to begin, more guests found themselves watching Vanessa than the decorated stage at the front of the ballroom. And some were. Near the entrance, another vehicle door quietly opened outside, bringing with it the next surprise the evening was not prepared to receive. Nobody inside the ballroom expected the next reaction. It began near the front row. An elderly investor who had spent 4 decades building companies suddenly stood up from his chair and turned toward the entrance. At first, several guests assumed he was simply stretching his legs. Then another executive rose. Then another. Within seconds, a small chain reaction spread through a section of the room occupied by business leaders, founders, and investors. Their attention was no longer fixed on the ceremony. It was fixed on the man who had just entered behind Vanessa. Nathaniel Grant stepped through the ballroom doors with the same quiet confidence that had defined him for years. He wore a simple charcoal suit with no visible attempt to attract attention. Yet attention followed him anyway. People recognized him immediately. Some knew him from financial publications. Others knew him from boardrooms, investment summits, and corporate acquisitions that had shaped entire industries. His reputation rarely depended on publicity. It depended on results. The whispers started instantly. Marcus heard his name before he saw him clearly. When he finally turned toward the entrance, confusion appeared across his face. Then disbelief. Marcus knew exactly who Nathaniel Grant was. Nearly everyone in his professional circle did. For more than 2 years, Marcus had unsuccessfully attempted to secure a meeting with one of Nathaniel's senior investment teams. The opportunity never materialized. Yet here stood the man himself. Not at a conference. Not at a private event. Not at a corporate summit. Here. At his wedding. Several guests immediately moved toward Nathaniel to greet him. A prominent executive extended his hand. Another welcomed him warmly. One investor even excused himself from an important conversation just to introduce a colleague. The atmosphere inside the ballroom changed so quickly that it felt almost unreal. Moments earlier, Vanessa had been the subject of quiet speculation. Now people were asking an entirely different question. How did she know Nathaniel Grant? Marcus watched as Nathaniel acknowledged a few greetings before his attention settled naturally on Vanessa. There was no dramatic announcement. No attempt to create a spectacle. Nathaniel simply walked toward her table with the ease of someone greeting a respected friend. When he arrived, Vanessa stood. They exchanged a warm smile. Then Nathaniel gently took her hand and greeted her as though seeing her was the most normal thing in the world. That simple interaction carried more weight than any speech ever could. Around the room, assumptions began collapsing one after another. People studied Vanessa differently now. They were no longer looking at the woman they remembered from years ago, they were trying to understand the woman standing before them. Marcus remained frozen near the front of the ballroom. Every detail of the evening suddenly felt unfamiliar. The attention he expected to command had shifted elsewhere. Even guests seated near the aisle were watching Vanessa and Nathaniel instead of the decorated stage. Nathaniel eventually took the seat beside her, and several influential figures immediately approached their table to say hello. Vanessa responded graciously but never appeared impressed by any of it. She simply smiled, listened, and remained herself. That quiet confidence created the strongest impression of all. For the first time that evening, Marcus realized something he had never considered. The woman he invited, believing she would arrive as a reminder of the past, had returned as someone connected to a future far larger than anything he had imagined. The ceremony eventually continued, but something had changed that no amount of planning could restore. The room still contained flowers, music, and celebration, yet the center of attention no longer belonged entirely to the stage. Conversations that should have focused on the wedding kept drifting elsewhere. Guests lowered their voices and exchanged observations. Investors introduced themselves to Vanessa. Executives who had barely acknowledged her existence years earlier now seemed eager to speak with her. Through it all, she remained gracious, calm, and remarkably unchanged. She never exaggerated her accomplishments. She never corrected anyone's assumptions. She simply listened and responded with quiet confidence. That composure became impossible to ignore. Marcus noticed it more than anyone. Throughout the evening, he found himself watching moments he could not fully understand. People he respected sought out Vanessa's opinion. Business leaders treated her as an equal. Nathaniel Grant spoke to her with genuine admiration rather than obligation. None of it matched the narrative Marcus had carried for years. Somewhere along the way, the woman he believed he had left behind had continued moving forward without him. The realization settled heavily because it arrived without drama. No confrontation forced it upon him. No speech exposed it. Reality simply stood in front of him, impossible to dismiss. As dinner progressed, the ballroom filled with the familiar rhythm of clinking glasses and quiet conversations. Yet one moment remained unforgettable. A senior executive from a national consulting firm approached Vanessa's table and publicly congratulated her on a recent strategic project that had gained attention across multiple states. Another guest recognized the achievement immediately and joined the conversation. Soon several others followed. The discussion had nothing to do with Marcus. Nothing to do with the divorce. Nothing to do with the past. It centered entirely on Vanessa's own work. For years she had been introduced through her relationship to someone else. Tonight she was being recognized for herself. Marcus looked away and stared briefly toward the ballroom windows. Outside, the convoy remained visible beneath the evening lights. Earlier he had viewed those vehicles as a mystery. Now they represented something far more significant. They represented a life he had never bothered to understand. Near the end of the evening, Vanessa quietly rose from her chair. Nathaniel stood as well. Several guests thanked her for attending and wished her safe travels. She accepted their kindness with a warm smile. Then she gathered her portfolio and prepared to leave. As she passed near the front of the ballroom, her eyes finally met. Marcus. The moment lasted only seconds. There was no anger in her expression. No bitterness. No desire to embarrass him. The absence of those things carried extraordinary power. She had nothing left to prove. Marcus opened his mouth as though searching for words, but none arrived. Vanessa simply offered a polite nod and continued walking. The ballroom doors opened. Cool evening air drifted inside. Nathaniel followed beside her as they stepped toward the waiting vehicles. Behind them, conversations resumed, music continued, and the celebration carried on. Yet many guests would struggle to remember details of the ceremony in the years ahead. What they would remember was the woman who entered without resentment, sat without insecurity, and left without seeking revenge. As the convoy disappeared into the night, Vanessa looked out across the city lights and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Peace. She had not returned to reclaim the past. She had returned as living proof that dignity never needs to shout to be heard. She did not win Marcus back. She won herself.